So here we go. Hey, hi. Um, just listened to Old Van's video, Forever Wolf Films, Amanda, and saw her painting there, and it was probably a scarier depiction of hell than I'm going to end up creating on my own. But I'm trying to get a little bit more gory. I don't want to go abstract in this piece, so I'm staying away from that and kind of just keeping up with the realism. Have had a couple people in the room. Have one person in the room right now, and I don't know. I guess I'll just set up and start talking away and go from there. Righty-ro. You know, the funny thing about this painting process so far is that I didn't know it was gonna garner so much attention as it has from Amendum and Old Fan, but I seem to be doing okay in that regards. I have a few characters I need to put in, so I'm just going to go ahead and start. And hope you can hear me there on Tiny Chat. Had a little bit of problems with that before. Um, what I'm working on here is a Cyclops with a split tongue, and yeah, it was kind of nice. It was kind of interesting. A few updates have happened with me over the last I don't know, couple hours. Um, I hung out with my documentary film guy. He filmed my parents tonight, and that went really well. It was really smooth, and we talked about deadlines of different festivals to put the film in, and we ran into a little bit of disagreement there. Calm down, kitty. Um, and while I was gone, my cat tore up the place. Um, anyway, so that's what's going on. We tried to discuss. I try to get him to calm down a little bit. He thinks I'm gonna be a little bit erratic if things don't go the way I want them to go. And of course, people generally want things to go the way they go. And anyway, also yesterday watched another video by um, Zombie Picture Show, which was influential in a way. And it would be nice to have him back in the room for a guided meditation, trying to see what we can talk about in his perception of things again, and this time have it record. It looks like I'm getting video on my YouTube channel there. If Lavali decides to speak or type anything, I'll respond to it. That's who's in my chat room currently. And sorry, I'm giving you my back. That's probably not a great view. That's a desktop though, so I have a hard time moving it around, getting it closer to the project. Um, anyway, um, there we go. There's a comment. Let's see what they have to say. Oh, it's been a rough night for me, they say. Yeah. Well, settle in. Um, we can maybe we can influence one another here. Yeah, I wanted to do a Cyclops here. I did Sharon, the guy over the river Styx with Migrant Fleetward yesterday,
and that was good. It was a good idea that he came up with. As far as my execution, I'm not too happy with my execution because I have this weird lake that I wanted to make into a lake of fire, but it's got 2 levels, so I don't know what I'll be doing exactly there. Um, uh, uh, ugh, yeah, um, yeah. Trying to think about like okay, Carla mentioned on my last video the idea of I was talking about consciousness primacy over the physical, and he started out with a premise um, that he says undermines my consideration and hence makes the physical primacy. And this, I tend to move back and forth on the topic because it seems to me that there are different ways to look at, um, different ways to look at uh, the idea of whether or not our consciousness is primacy over the physical or vice versa. And I should probably pull up his comment again because that would be a good starting point as far as continuing a dialogue about it while I'm painting, while I'm drawing here. Let's see, I just got another comment. Let's finish up here on this piece here, and then read that. Got to do some pointy fingernails on this guy. Yeah, I really need to depict people more in a writhing posture, kind of just a really upset posture. So let's see what they typed. I like Bertrand Russell's adoption of neutral monism due to the American propagandists like James and Pierce and their uh, futural acceptance of possible theories of knowledge. We are endlessly reading Hegel with Kant's synthetic a priori in light of Gödel's incompleteness. Well, that's a lot to digest right out of the gate. I haven't read the classics like that in a while. Um, but you are jumping in. Bertrand Russell's adoption of neutral monism, I'm not certain if I'm familiar with that. And due to American propagandists like James and Pierce, I don't know Pierce, their futural acceptance of possible theories of knowledge. Futural acceptance of possible theories of knowledge, that's an interesting way to think about it. Um, and I wonder if that's a claim about the about an openness towards new theories of um, of knowledge that extend beyond one's lifetime, that they're open to future uh, perceptions of time, or not future perceptions of time, but future perceptions of knowledge. That would be nice if a philosopher mentioned that, hey, we don't know what other people are going to be thinking, 20 years from now, or 20 years after our death. So we're open to that concept. I'm a little slow. I feel a little slow on topic today. And when people name drop philosophers that I don't know, then I'm not real certain what to say. Um, American pragmatist. You're not Carla by chance, are you? We're endlessly reading Hegel, Kant synthetic a priori. Google's. I don't know the connection between Kant's synthetic a priori in light of Gödel's incompleteness. If you wanted to elaborate on that, that might help get me in a different space. Like I'm not certain what relationship you're mentioning there. I do know the idea of the synthetic a priori, but I don't know how it relates to Gödel's incompleteness theorem. Anyway, anyhow, here I am priding myself on having a philosophy, and yet I've become a bit of a lame duck when it comes to what's being taught in colleges right now, and my memory of how about synthetic a priori. It's as a use, it as a philosophical claim. Gödel's incompleteness theorem. Well, you've given me a lot of things already to refresh my mind on there, Lovell Reed. I've been talking mostly about consciousness's priority over physicalism, as opposed to physicalism's primacy over consciousness. Consciousness's priority over physicalism. And that's a tough one to argue because it's very unintuitive and kind of more about the loss of identity. But since I'm all alone in the room, being stumped by basics, perhaps I should talk more about the painting until everything gels. But Carla did make a comment on my video arguing if you presume like a scientific pragmatism about the world and that it's over there, then in light of that, you must accept physicalism as primacy over the consciousness. And I'm doing my best to make certain that I'm opening up a space in which to argue that consciousness is primacy over the physical. That what it is we think and do ultimately has a role relative to self, more so than the epistemology about how knowledge is strung together, how things must in fact be. Synthetic a priori. Let me think about synthetic a priori. All right, we got somebody else in here. Oh, I guess you didn't expand on that connection between Kant's synthetic a priori and Gödel's incompleteness. How they relate, or how there's a problem with one, or fitting the two together.
Let me do something real quick. Ho ho ho. Alright, alright. What are we gonna do here? The analytic-synthetic distinction is conceptual distinction used primarily in philosophy to distinguish propositions, statements of the affirmative subject-predicate judgment, into two types: analytic propositions and synthetic propositions. Analytic propositions are true by virtue of their meaning, while synthetic propositions are true by how their meaning relates to the world. Oh, okay. Synthetic a priori, how philosophers have used it. Yeah, it's not dissimilar to what I'm arguing, because you could say that the analytic, the synthetic would be an argument for physicalism taking primacy, but the analytic would be more about finding the meanings of a term as they sit. Now Carla had mentioned something about our knowledge is based on pragmatism, upon evolutionary survival value, and what works is what we consider true, and what doesn't work is considered it's not practical. So he says it's not part of our knowledge set, but it is in fact part of our knowledge set, because we speak about the meanings of abstracts, the meanings of dreams, the meanings of how meaning affects our day-to-day interactions with ourselves, a relational, self-relational, auto-affective kind of approach to being. And let me look up Gödel's incompleteness theorem and see how this notion of how their meaning relates to the world, and see if I can get on topic here. Hey, kitty. Good kitty. Don't get on the computer. Don't type anything. Don't type Shakespeare's classics. Of the two theorems, they establish inherent limitations of all but the most trivial axiomatic systems capable of doing arithmetic. The theorems by Gödel are important both in mathematical logic and completeness theorem. It's impossible giving a negative answer. First incompleteness theorem states that no consistent system of axioms whose theorems can be listed as effective procedure, like a computer program, but it could be any sort of algorithm, is capable of proving all truths about the relational of the natural numbers. For any such system, there will always be statements about the natural numbers that are true, but this is unprovable within the system. Second incompleteness theorem is an exception. Oh, okay, so synthetic a priori, okay. Are true by their meaning, how their meaning relates to the world. Oh, okay, so if it's synthetic a priori, it's how the meaning of the words relate to the world, and Gödel's incompleteness theorem, they're true regardless of how, they're true regardless of whether or not they can be proven, because they're used, so they're useful. Okay, so they do seem like they're kind of one and the same. Let's see. Sorry, I just shot some hot water up my butt, so I missed some of this. Carla sells drugs to kids. Just kidding. What is your impression of talking with Trick? Oh, okay. That's a hell of a stick while I'm trying to figure out what you were saying there for 5 whole minutes. I have a really positive impression of Trick. I think Trick's a little stuck on his on definitional perspectives. Um, he's really stuck on how things are defined in the world and how things must absolutely be, that they're not, he's kind of he takes the basic concepts and he works with them very well, but he doesn't seem to want to flirt with more peripheral ideas. And perhaps my philosophy has already been quote unquote defeated in the philosophical community, but I don't believe that. Um, what I'm trying to do is formulate a kind of a way physicalism might envelop consciousness, but consciousness peers back at physicalism. And somewhere in the physical ground, whatever it is we are grounded at, is capable of having super radical fissures such that what one is imagining, is or not necessarily imagining, but what one is thinking plays a role in the physicalism, plays a role in how the environment reflects back to the individual. And I guess I'm having a hard time gathering, a theory of language that includes my perception of how I think things work. So I'm still formulating my philosophy based on the facts, like the fact of evolution, the fact of finding something historic to relay, to make a machinery of thoughts in order for biology to accept a grounded theory of evolution that makes the most sense. Evolution is based on positives, meaning it's based on agreement about historic means, or a means of looking at history in kind of a mechanical way. A most accepted definition of possibly how organisms came about, and yet it's also looked at as an active process that's happening also. Let's see what we have here. Oh, wow. Wow. Hey, I got somebody up, but I can't hear them. I can't hear what they're saying. Let me see. Well, I know my volume's up because I'm hearing the plops. It's like Trick said last night. No, he doesn't know I'm here. Good, you're here. I caveman. How does your philosophy differ from Amendum's Das Pook? Interesting. Or does it at all? Well, yeah, my philosophy does differ from Amendum's in that I don't agree with the imposition argument. I don't believe that life is imposed just because you can't have an agreement to be here, meaning you can't ask an unborn person whether or not they want to exist, but you, in a way, it's counterfactual that it's an impossibility. Also, it's like asking
a no armed man if they would like to play tennis, or say, you know, it's it's kind of uh, I don't know. I mean, give me a second to regroup and think about exactly the differences. I'm wafting back and forth from Carla to synthetic a priori to my difference with amendum in my mind, but I argue differently that as far as imposition, that one must first exist in order to be imposed upon. You can't impose upon something that's non-existent. As soon as it exists, you can impose upon it, but he tends to use the word imposition in a way to suggest otherwise, and we discussed this, that he wants a whole nother word in order to describe the type of imposition that I'm talking about. It's not that he doesn't understand what I'm saying, it's that he thinks that the word imposition is a proper word to use, and I'm saying, well, it is, but you have to refine the definition. It's a type of thinking. Um, it's a type of imposition that he's referring to, but that there are exceptions to how it is he can use it, that where it wouldn't apply appropriately. I guess that's a really base and kind of a crappily said idea of my difference between amendum. I also believe that people should have kids, not say no to kids. I believe that the human spirit and the process of living and dying is a worthy adventure. And I'm a spiritualist. I'm a theist, where he is not, and I base that on personal experience as opposed to biblical dogmas. Let's see what else is being typed. I'm missing too many things here. Or does it at all? Antinatalism isn't wrong as such, I would argue. I mean, it's defendable and all that. But then that depends whether we're talking about Benatar or Ligotti or Karl Popper, and how you want to frame the debate and how you would like to frame the debate. Yeah. Um, yeah, interesting. I'm curious if Lavalley would be willing to dock up and talk. I might be better in kind of a free form, but I do have to admit that my mind is on more personal things right now as opposed to philosophical things, so I'm trying to make the leap and get in the mood here, especially since we're recording this amazing video that everybody's going to watch, and see how I am when I'm not in my game. All right.
So what do you think about Benatar's asymmetry?
I think there's some nice propositions in it. But immediately right now I'm trying to run over in my head the four premises that he has, because I don't buy the four premises. Let's see, what was the one about? Yeah, the not always a bad. Yeah, I know. Do I have to post this video now that you got me in a quandary? No, I argued against the third and fourth proposition of the asymmetry, but right now I can't bring it to mind as to how they're stated. if you looked it up and gave it to me, that might feed me while I'm doing this, or I can look it up here in just a second.
I think one of the main things he's arguing is that, like, if you live, there is 100% chance that you will suffer or harm will happen to you in some form, and there's not a 100% chance that you will have a experience that you think that was worth going through, I suppose. So that's the one thing, is that non-existence is not a harm. I guess it is kind of obfuscated, and I've heard it described in different ways, but that was one of the things that stood out for me, is that he's arguing that if you live, you may consider your experience to be positive or worth living, but there's not a guarantee of that, and there is a guarantee that there will be at least some degree of suffering.
Well, yeah, there's possibility of suffering, but the guarantee of suffering is. See, I argue I argue that suffering is not always a bad. That's where I differ with Benatar, is that one may say that you will necessarily suffer, and firstly I say, well, it's not guaranteed that one will always suffer, that every entity will suffer. That is not a necessary fact. And it's funny, I got in an argument with Trick about that. Like, a child could come right out of the womb and be killed right then, immediately, like in such a substantial way as for its nerve endings to never, to just explode on a grenade or something like that, where it would not experience any suffering in its existence. And then, of course, it gets, talked about by Amendum. Well, we're talking about, a regular life. We're talking about a full and consistent life. And, of course, that extends the idea. But then Trick came back to me with kind of a refute of that. But anyway, and so I argued that suffering is not always a bad, that it kind of a depletion of the law of identity, that definitionally one must not necessarily always have a valuation of one's experience, that the evaluative process of their experience falls to the isness category, that one simply is in whatever state that they're in, and the valuation of it being a negative is something that's like culturally, communally lingual. It's based on language. The value system is based on language, and then of course that gets pointed back to look at empirical examples of animals, experiencing pain, and then I bring up the notion of valuation, that they're simply accepting, they reject what's happening, but you can never reject what is happening, that it is an is state in whatever case that it is, whatever temporal frame you want to frame it in and define it in. So I was maneuvering around Benatar's asymmetry by finding an exception to the suffering is always a bad rule, and then you'd have to remind me again. Let's see, what do we have here? What would you say should be, who's Mr. Savant? No, oh, Mr. Okay. What Mr. Savant would you say should be, if any, the legal penalty for procreation? And then, in that legal context, how would that relate to an immorality of murder, since anatalism entails something to the order of creation of murder, and many AMs not mentioning Gary has a liking to procreation. I should also say that I'm a spiritualist in that I believe that the one's consciousness takes priority over the physical world, that giving birth to other individuals is a matter of normative course, and that there's a value in the normative process, in kind of like, let's say, the value of how it is we evolved to be the type of individuals that we have become, and that the continuation of this becoming formulates a teleology such that one recognizes their end, they recognize the end of their children in the future, a forecast of the end, and yet the teleology is an idealism, that there's an idealism in being able to live and die, and to suffer all stratas of experience.
Well, and Mendham's just going to argue that the teleology is just the teleology of a DNA molecule, and I think that's what he's putting on trial, is that it's not necessarily a good in and itself to procreate. Like, if
Well,
you're saying that if that's the point, just to like extend evolution, he's going to argue that, even though it is teleological, there is a goal per se, but I mean, I guess I could just ask, do you think we are evolving or something, or do you think that like society will eventually reach some sort of world that could be objectively defined as progress? Not, I mean, something other than just industry building stuff, and maybe even on the same criteria of far less suffering and far more positive enjoyment or whatever. Do you think that's that's where we're headed?
Amendum argues that we're no longer biologically evolving, that we are, I think he argues that we're culturally evolving at most, and that it's not natural selection, it's a type of synthetic selection. And I think that is a misunderstanding of biology, and that, if you believe in survival of the fittest, you might want to reduce that to survival of those who survive. But survival of those who survive, it's always the individual in a changing environment, the organism in a changing environment. And so I do believe that the actual organism is evolving because there's still an exchange of genetics, and there's a depletion of other genetics. There's the genetics that are passed on and the ones that are not, and that's just a matter of fact. And so evolution is simply, a type of change in the structure. And so I believe that we are, we're not only culturally evolving, but we are genetically evolving, and that's just an ongoing continuance. And as far as the society getting better, well, our history, like if you're going to believe in evolution, then you got to believe, as a historic theory, then you also have to believe in regular history, and regular history tells us that we're living at a better standard of living than our predecessors. And if we're living at a better standard of living than our predecessors, then you could say that yes, things are getting better. That sufferability is going down. It's I don't know. I'm trying to think of the words that I used before. Marginalized. We're marginalizing suffering. We're doing our best to eradicate suffering. We're increasing longevity of life. I take on a transhumanist ideology
myself. I don't know who will get it, or if it's going to be partitioned out, but supposedly even our homeless people are living almost as well as kings did, 400 years ago. Just having shelter and food and the nutritional value that they ingest. And so I wouldn't argue that we're living, I'd argue that we're definitely living in a more progressive state. And I think that we're reaching a point where that's even going to leap significantly forward as information is brought together and shared more readily. Our advancements are going to move at, I don't want to say exponentially, but increasingly a higher speed of discoveries and inventions are on the forefront, and that should be something to look forward to. It's almost as if our ancestors suffered to get their descendants to live a better life than they had. Whether or not you'd say, oh, my parents had a job and we don't have a job anymore, and talk about immediate politics, that overlooks the that overlooks the general lifestyle, inherited lifestyle of just being somebody in modern Western culture, even modern Eastern culture. I mean, India and Africa have it bad still. Maybe Malaysia and Philippines. There's some issues about who gets it, who doesn't, but as far as a forefront of technology and advancement, there's there. And then this argument that we're a DNA molecule, I disagree with that out of hand. This reduction to our being a DNA molecule overlooks the milieu of one's conscious interaction with aesthetics and meaning, and what is possibly understood and considered as an entire entity, and that you can't it's like saying that we are stardust, which I don't mind the statement we are stardust, but there's no practical value in arguing that, because it's so reduced that I wouldn't go around considering and differentiating any item as stardust. And the same thing with DNA, like, oh, we are DNA molecules. That's a meme that Gary's put out that is not satisfactory for all considerations of our existence, all definitions of who we are. Even to talk about what it takes to, all the bacteria that must be in place in order for this DNA coding to spread throughout one's body. We are also other bacteria. We are also more than a DNA molecule by necessity. We are a whole collaboration of entities and molecules and orientation and relationship between microorganisms, and this idea that we are all able to be summed up simply to the smallest amount is, I mean, how to phrase this in a metaphor, like, I'm not denying that we are made up of a genetic code. I'm just saying, to say that that's what we are, it's almost like saying Photoshop versus TinyChat programming. Well, it's all ones and zeros, okay? But what makes up the ones and zeros? Well, it's electrons. Electrons make up ones and zeros, or makes up the one, and the absence of the electron makes up the zero. So it's presence versus absence. So we are presence. The programs are presence. They're presentings. They're occurrences. And so the DNA molecule is also an occurrence. It's an occurrence. But what I was going to say about that is you don't say that Photoshop is just ones and zeros. You define Photoshop in the totality of not only of what it's made of, but what it's capable of doing, what its expression is capable of doing in a greater thing, so that the totality of a thing is found outside of the thing. The totality of a thing must envelope the thing that it's totalizing. So I shouldn't say that, but I don't like the idea of saying that we are in fact DNA molecules, because it doesn't make sense in terms of definitional description. And Gary will skip. He'll take the atomized notion of we are DNA molecules and then make an argument about the reproductive process of DNA molecules, when in fact the sperm itself, how a sperm is built, the majority of a sperm is not the DNA molecule. The majority of the sperm is housing the DNA molecule, but it's made up of the parent's DNA. The DNA that becomes something else is differentiated from the whole surrounding, the whole capsule that's moving the DNA, that's competing with other subgroups of DNA. I don't know if that makes any sense, or if you're if I'm molding any sort of my whole idea is to debase some of these premises in a particular way.
I was just going to say that the map is that, like, if you take a high standpoint, you might be able to defend human existence. But he's going to say that the map on paper also includes all the other sentient organisms who, in the wild, certainly are suffering a lot.
But how would you reduce that to the DNA molecule?
I'm not going to reduce it to the DNA molecule. I don't really think whether, it doesn't really matter. It's just he's saying that there are all of these consciousnesses experiencing things, and there's quite enough suffering I guess for a random there's enough suffering to say, fuck it. Even if there's a potential of gaining something, I think he's having a hard time describing what it is that we're accomplishing. So he needs a point to define the suffering.
Well, yeah, just what you said there. He doesn't believe that we're accomplishing anything, and he keeps saying it's a stupid game, as if the quote-unquote gladiator war isn't developing in a different fashion, as if we're not accomplishing a different type of gladiator war, and that's granting him a lot. That's saying a lot towards in his favor. But at the same time, the game of life, what it is we do and what it is we accomplish, the meaning of it, he wants to sum it all up that it's worthless. And at that stage, I say, well, the consciousness of each individual sentient entity is what's making the valuation about what's valuable and what's not valuable. It's consciousness based. It's not an objective valuation. It's a subjective valuation. Meaning we might rise out of physicalism, but like a candy cane, we twist and we turn and we point back down through our minds outward back into the universe. And it's even questionable about whether or not our consciousness, whether or not the totality of our being stems from the inside out initially, waking up to its environment, including its environment, transparent through its environment, echoing into its environment, or whether or not it's a separation. Just because my nerve endings end here doesn't mean that my affect doesn't translate into the environment and have the environment reflect back to me. And I might be a little bit off topic from where you were going, so you can restate it or re-come at me.
Let me ask, do you believe that there is immaterial objects, or do you think it's all material? It's all physical things?
Immaterial object. Well, I don't. I want to say there's immaterial things, but I don't like to use the word object because that has such a loaded connotation between object and physicalism and subject and imagination. I don't know. Give me an example of just for the sake of interacting with you to find out more about where you're coming from. Give me an example of a.
You believe in a spirit or something. You believe in some sort of thing that is not reducible to physics.
Well, I didn't say that. I think that, the spirit, for all I know, could be reducible to physics. It's just that it's not reducible to scientific knowledge, as we know scientific knowledge is. It's not reducible to the regular ground which we consider to be the ground of our reality, whatever it is you consider your quote-unquote reality. Spiritualism moves through and is of a different planular realm, if you will. If I grant it any materialism, it's functioning at a different level than what it is we currently use to define reality and what it is science can control. Science must control something in order to test the thing. And spirits, the things that I've witnessed are like singular events that you can't, that's like seeing a UFO. You can't grab the UFO and test the UFO. It's something that's out there that's experienced. And so if I say I'm a spiritualist, it's because I believe there's powers that are functioning at a greater, higher, or an unknown level relative to our own. And that our imagination moves in and out of consideration of what these things might be. But yes, I am a spiritualist in that but I wouldn't say that I'm a non-materialist. Like Thou Art That made a video today. He talked about Nietzsche's genealogy of morals, and then he talked about another author saying a geology of morals. And he said a geology of morals, like morals are layered in stacks, and almost to say they're layered in our actual environment, meaning that your relationship to the universe is as infinite as... Oh, shit. Hang on a sec, my kitty's stuck. Sorry, I got off topic there. I'd like to be over there reading the comments, but wow, I don't believe I've had this many people in my room at one time. I don't know who pumped everyone my way.
Well, we don't have to talk about, the physics, or, that's Piro's, I think that's Piro's game. You can talk about your art theory or whatever. I've heard, if that's your thing, then I'm not.
Well, no, you can bring up whatever you want. I have a background, in basic philosophy, and then I skipped into philosophy of language, and I studied heavily philosophies of language, and that's my background. But then I've also had these occurrences, which I call fissures in reality, that I'm not exactly certain where to place them relative to aesthetics and imagination and material physicalism. And because I'm not certain how to place it...
You had experiences of what? I'm sorry, I missed that.
Well,
experience?
if you go 2 videos back on my channel, you'll see me describing a painting, and I discuss there. And if you go very far back, you'll see a video that has like 2,000 views on it called like belief in a higher power, like personal experience as reason to believe in a higher power. If you watch those 2 things, I go at them in depth. The painting, I go at it in depth, and I show what it is I experienced. I don't know if you're familiar with Philip K. Dick or Carl Jung's Red Book, but I appeal to those because I think I've had experiences that are outside of the normal realm of other people's experiences, most other people's experiences. Oh, Piro's on.
Yes, I am.
Hey. Oh, yeah, we can jump into this, I suppose. I have another 20 minutes of video, and then I can let it post, and then I can start another video. I normally do two videos, it seems, while I'm drawing. But yeah, so you can go ahead and lead the conversation, or continue to lead the conversation. You're doing a great job.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we could move over to aesthetics. When you're talking about these experiences, how much do you think that alternated states play into the creation of something that, I don't know, we'll call it novel, or we'll call it, I don't know if novelty is the right word, but what is your state of mind? What is the relation between your state of mind and the creative act or whatever? Or is there any? I mean, is there a distinction between art and just interest? Or I mean, that seems like that's
No.
more your game. So
No, that
pick your
opens
brain
up.
a little bit on that.
That opens up some things. Immediately when you started the question, I was thinking about my interaction with Amendum, where Amendum believes that everything is mathematical, that mathematics not only lays upon all things in physics, but that it defines all things in physics, as opposed to mathematics being a human invention. I had once made a video a long time ago saying that Amendum has a goal to erase logic from the universe by eradicating humans. If humans are the only intelligence in the universe, which I don't believe, but if they were, presuming that they were, that if you removed all humans, then you would necessarily remove all mathematics, hence all things in the universe are not made up of mathematics. And the reason I bring that up is because in a recent video that I had of him, it's probably 4 or 5 videos back now, with him, I was challenging the idea of aesthetics, that meaning in an abstract painting is not only relative to the individual consciousness that's having it, but that it could not 100%ly be mapped, that you could always find another new association, definition, or meaning indefinitely, where Amendum said that no, there's an entirety of meaning could be found. And so when you were bringing up aesthetics, immediately I was just thinking about how aesthetics can play a role through people's conscious considerations of the world. Yeah, Piero, if you wanna jump in at any time, feel free. I didn't answer your question though. I know I didn't answer your question.
It's all right. It wasn't really a direct question. I was just wondering, I, I mean, how often you're an artist, you're a painter. How often do you think, I mean, about like the state of mind you're in when you're painting, or does it even matter? I mean, you know, yeah. What is the value of alternated state from? You're talking about states that are drastically altered from common perception, and part of the goal, right, is to use your art to show a different perspective, maybe. I mean, I don't know if that's your goal or if you have a goal or whatnot, but you know.
No,
wondering.
I don't have a goal of it, but I do believe that there's different perceptual shifts that individuals are capable of going through, and that aesthetics can be an impetus to that change, and that you can re-reflect in different states on something that's familiar in an entirely different way the next time that you reflect on it. What do I want to say about that? I mean, and that's kind of a given. I think that's kind of common knowledge there. But it'd be the difference between looking at a painting when you're sober and then getting really drunk and looking at a painting, or getting really high and looking at a painting, or if you suffer from mental illness, when you're more grounded looking at something as opposed to when you're less grounded. As far as what that as far as the intent in the manufacturing of the artwork or the aesthetics, I'm not certain what to say about it, other than the process narrows my frame, narrows my considerations about what can be conceived. It narrows the domain in which my outlook on it narrows the domain in which I am able to look at something when I do the process. It's like it's not. See, I don't believe necessarily in determinism, but in to say determinability. The closer I move my pencil to the canvas, the more one could say there is a determinable range in which I'm able to narrow where my pencil is going to hit the canvas, but you can never know infinitely small where I'm going to hit the pencil to the canvas. So I'm trying to like talk about ever reducing domains of determinability. And at some point, you just have to pragmatically say it hit there, as opposed to I affected this quark, or I pushed this atom around in this particular fashion, and quantumly it moved this other atom on the other side of the sun, or something of that effect. It's like, I don't know. I don't know.
Hello.
There's Piero. I needed
Yeah,
it.
can you hear me this time?
Yep.
I had a mic problem before. I think I'm curious what you think. On mathematics, we agree, you and I agree that it's just a human invention, like any measurement system. We're just a schema for breaking things down. On the other hand, mathematics has come to mean something very general, like there's all kinds of mathematics. It's not just the square Cartesian thing. It doesn't just add the sort of circle of a polar coordinate. There's hyperbolic, there's any kind of coordinate system. There's all kinds of mathematics, and a very general abstract rule as to if you want to make a mathematics of your own, what kind of what rules it has to follow, and there are rules of certain sorts of consistency. I mean, and they're specific, like the law of induction has to be valid in a mathematics. So what mathematics in general, maths, has become seems to be like, well, any language for expressing or encoding or talking about patterns. So is the universe mathematical becomes a question of, can you reduce the universe down to patterns? And then finally, obviously a lot of patterns are present in nature, very regular ones, but there's this randomness or so-called indeterminate, and that's what we call a stochastic pattern. Statistics has brought mathematics to the pattern of, it's too random for you, wait and see how it turns out, and so that is also a pattern. And so I think it's become a truism that yes, the universe can be described with mathematics, because you have all patterns that are regular and patterns that are fundamentally chaotic, like the digits of pi and fractals, and and what's left? What could possibly be left? So just because, but it's sort of tautological, but it's a valid truism that yes, the universe is made of patterns.
I'm worn out already. Just listen to that garbage. Tired now, I can't even barely stand up no more.
What is Amendum Drug?
Out.
Is that really him or a recording?
73 years.
Well, the
That's
thing
not
is,
Amendum. That's a video loop.
that's what I was
You
thinking.
on the camera.
I can't even see a name on his. Amendum, do this if you're real.
It's like the Stickum rule. You have to say touch your nose to prove. Yeah, you just did a loop.
Fuck you.
That's just a loop. You anticipated that.
Fuck you. Your number bullshit, pattern crap, all that bullshit, crap, pattern crap.
I was defending your position, Gary. Typical, you come in and trash me. No, we were just talking about you think the world can be described with mathematics and how stupid that is, and I was defending your position. So by attacking me, you have just said you are.
Where have I ever said that? Where did I say?
Well, I didn't claim
You said it
that
with
you had
me.
said it. I
You
just
said it in
defended
my
the position I
argument. You
was
said it
claiming.
with my argument with you.
Yeah, well, obviously it's a little more complicated than mathematics, but it's not much more complicated. Right? Just put a penis and a stomach, and so yeah, the number 2 with like a stomach and a penis on it. There you go. That's the universe. Sum it up.
Well, see, here's the idea that pattern recognition is still a conscious recognition, and just because we as humans can share this recognition through language, and through observation first and then through language, to grant it out there that there's patterns is still as much of a lingual feat as it is an actual fact of the universe. There's still the lingual feat of pattern recognition, and it's interesting to call it recognition.
Right and wrong,
That's supposed to be.
smart and stupid. Those are the patterns.
But
You can't get it right or you get it wrong.
But Dot Spoot, that is supposed to be answered by the fact that since the patterns in science specifically, but in general, are predictive, since they predict and post-dict, right? They also say what happens in the past and they fit that, but they also predict. That's supposed to show that the pattern isn't just lingual. Now, our particular writing a 2 a particular way and thinking it's 2 plus 2 as opposed to some, arbitrary 2, foobar 2, some other operator, those are optional. They're relative options, like counting on base 10 because you have 10 fingers. But there's got to be something else because of the predictive nature. That's the argument. I don't totally believe that, but I think it's a good argument.
Oh, how do you
why
counter
there's more
that?
than just.
how do you counter it then if
It's
you don't?
a tool there. It's not just a
Yeah.
creation. It's a tool. Yeah.
If you don't believe it, what is it that keeps you from believing it? If you don't believe it, what is it that keeps you
From
from
believing what exactly? That the universe is made of patterns?
Well, you just said Yeah.
Phantasmagorical fairy tale. There's nothing else, okay? There's nothing else you can't pile anything on this thing but sugar and frosting and sparkles, okay? You can disguise what it is, but you already defined the cake. Cake is a replicating molecule. Genes that navigate the environment. We have tools to make it capable of navigating the environment. And that's all they're there for. They're not there for anything else but to figure out how to get food in your mouth and how to get your dick in a vagina.
No, I know, but Amanda, you're going off on a
Yeah, but
whole
Dot my answer is
tangent.
that this. Wait, Dot's different tangent. Dot's food. The thing is, what I think is this. There's this, they call it a law. It's not a law. Laws are the patterns and stuff. But there's a pattern of conservation. Like what is. But there's also like this law/pattern of transformation. So things can change radically from mass to energy. You name it, from tadpole to frog, or from mouse to human. Right. So there's transformation, which means we're not really like restricted by this law of conservation or really pattern of conservation. But what there is there's stuff that changes into other stuff. And because there's always something, it could be, it's radical from energy to mass or vice versa. But since it's a change, you can always account for it. You might need to multiply by some constant or whatever, but 50 quantity of energy is going to turn into 1 quantity of mass, and that's what gives the arisement or whatever of patterns, right? Patterns is how complicated it gets. When you're transferring from one state to another with all these constants and transformation rules, with just 3 or 4 levels of that, it starts to become very complex. And with like 19 or 20 or handfuls of transformations, supercomputers even right now can't really handle it. So it's incredibly complex, right? But that's why you have these laws of physics that are all these different patterns, because when you get up to our level, of course there'd be millions of rules, because the simple rules have so many ways of expressing themselves. But the basic issue with mathematics as joined to physics is that the reason there are these patterns, and we will always keep finding them, is because all we're saying is there's a law of conservation, right? Stuff that can transform, but it doesn't just go away or come out of nothing. And that necessitates some simple laws of pattern that once you run them 3 or 4 times like a fractal, simple rules become infinitely complex,
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I would say, yeah, it's fair but that's not what most people think when they're arguing that the universe is Einstein 1, 2 grid paper. They only know about one coordinate system. But if you think about all of the coordinate systems, there's a issue about whether patterns, if that's a general enough and yet says something about the universe. It's general enough that you're open-minded, but you're saying something about how the universe works. And I think it is. I think it's a sweet spot of course, we will always find more patterns, infinite numbers of patterns in the universe.
Right. Infinite snowflakes. Yeah, big deal. It's still snowflakes. Okay, so all this pretense that the patterns aren't fall into simple categories.
No.
That can be defined, and they are. There aren't too many categories that are interesting. There might be an infinite number of categories, but guess what? Most of the categories aren't very interesting.
Well, no, but
99.99999% of the universe is not doing anything fucking interesting. All it's doing is all the people walk into the elevator and how all the people are in the elevator. Okay, I mean, energy doesn't even transform, Piero. I don't think even that's true. All it does is get rearranged.
Well, no, I know, but here Gary is saying that a snowflake is a snowflake when during the falling process, during the formation, the falling process, all the molecules that are close to that snowflake are gathering on and feeding the snowflake if it's getting colder, or they're arranging the snowflake, they're dismantling the snowflake, they're changing the isness of that snowflake, meaning we get bigger, but we still say we're a person, we granted identity, but Gary has a knack for always wanting to say what is and outline what is as a complete state. It's as if there's no variability and no room to breathe with Gary, and there's just a kind of a fundamental difference, because things are constantly morphing. So even though you throw a category on something and say that's a person growing, that's a snowflake growing, those are lingual names, those are lingual identities, those are not facts about, those are not descriptions about what the thing is.
I think the category is a description. Yes, it's a cold ice crystal. There you go. Pretty much says all you need to say. Pain in the ass in the winter. Yeah, it can make your tires go all crookedy. Yeah, who cares? It's just not that interesting. You know, just saying the basic function.
Well, who's to say it's not that interesting?
The basic function is just keep pretending the reality doesn't exist. Keep pretending we can avoid 4 billion years of evolution, and a recognition of what exactly this mechanism exists, why it exists, how it exists. Let's ignore those questions and just pretend that we can just make up some sort of our own little fable and say, there, we've done our job as intelligent human beings. So what we have done is stuck our heads up our ass, and instead of human beings, we've been ostriches or some other kind of animal that's dumb. Go ahead, throw your brain in the garbage. Don't put in having one, because we're just going to talk shit.
There's more to the story, is what I'm saying, than where Gary wants to rest his conclusions about what is the case.
Well, Gary has a very classical understanding of physics, like from Ptolemy through Newton.
Yeah, that's
There's
just
no
a lie,
surrealist.
okay?
He stops and says it's got surreal.
Einstein was not one of you phantasmagorical pussy shits, okay? Einstein, okay? Include Einstein. I don't say anything Einstein would disagree with, Hero. So fuck that bullshit classical.
Well, actually, you have.
Actually, you have.
It magically, randomly. I don't think God plays dice with the universe.
Fair enough. That's a fair argument.
Thanks for liking my mohawk. I'll start this again quickly.
He brought up there's relativity, that there is no one.
We'll be back in 5 minutes.